Hello everyone, welcome back to another video. This week's video is a continuation of last week's video where I'm demonstrating what programs I use in my drafting and editing process when I'm writing a book. Last week I demonstrated Dabble Writer, which is the program that I use to draft my books. If you're curious about that, check out that video. I will link it somewhere in the description below as well as at the top of this video. Feel free to check that video out before watching this one if you're curious about Dabble. And so this week I will be going into how I edit with Fictionary StoryCoach. I am both a writer and an editor, so I edit my own books, I self-edit, and I also edit clients' books. So other authors, other writers, I do editing work for them. I do both story level edits and line and copy edits as well as proofreads. I mostly do copy edits and proofreads within my full service self-publishing package, but I also take on clients for story level editing, which is another word for developmental editing, and I use Fictionary for that. My personal process when I'm writing my books is I draft in Dabble, then I export my manuscript from Dabble into a Word document, and then I import that Word document into Fictionary StoryCoach to do my story level or developmental edits on my draft. I'm going to demonstrate for you how I use Fictionary for that. If you want to see how I export it from Dabble, check out the previous video because I go into detail on how to export in that video. But in this video, I already have my document in Microsoft Word, so I'm going to show you how I do that in Fictionary. You can see this is the dashboard, the Fictionary StoryCoach dashboard. There are different versions of Fictionary you can get. There's two main versions. There's StoryTeller and StoryCoach. StoryTeller is just for writers. It's for writers and authors who want to self-edit their work. StoryCoach is for editors, so editors who edit the work of other writers. Since I do both, I subscribe to a StoryCoach account because you can do both in it. Because StoryCoach has all the features for both editing your own work and the work of other authors. If you've been curious about Fictionary for a while, then this is the video for you because I'm going to go in depth into what all this program can do and what I personally use it for and my process when I'm editing. And this overlaps with my process of editing clients' books, but I will probably make a separate video on how I do that specifically for clients. I'm just going to show you how I do that for my own book in this video. Alright, so you see here in Fictionary, I'm at my bookshelf, and you can toggle between my clients and bookshelf. This is, if you have a StoryCoach account. So I will be working within my bookshelf since I'm editing my own work, not the work of my clients. So I'm going to start with importing my manuscript. It says client manuscript, but I will change that later. This is how you do it in Fictionary. You start with the import button, and then I'm going to select the file right here. I'm going to name it Convergence Point. That's the name of my upcoming book. For those of you who don't know yet, I'm starting a new series, and this is going to be the first book in that series. Series is called Echo Protocol, and Convergence Point is going to be book 1 of the series. Fictionary is going to ask you on this page, how are your chapters formatted? My chapters, I used both heading 1 and the word chapter for my chapters, so I'm just going to select I used both and hit next. In this book, I only have 1 scene per chapter, so I'm going to select no, but if you have multiple scenes in each chapter, then you select I sure do. When you import, it's probably going to do some weird stuff, and that's okay. You can change that later, so I like to just make sure that the main part of the book is here. Here's the prologue. and here's the last chapter. That's fine. As long as it's there, I can edit later where everything goes. So I just click next. Then Fictionary tells you what you have. Again, this might not always be accurate because it can do some weird stuff depending on what's in your document when you import, but that's no problem. We can fix that later. So now we start with going to the cast of characters. So here, what I like to do is I like to set my protagonist. So there are... This tells me that I might have spelt her name wrong at some point. Aubrey Vale Quinn is her name, not Aubrey. So, I'll have to look into that. But essentially here, you'll notice that sometimes Fictionary will pick up things that it thinks are names, but they're not actually names. Like, one of my characters once says, "Welcome to Casa Quinn," so Fictionary thinks that's a name. So it's not a name, so if that happens, you could just select it and click on Delete Selected Characters, and then it will delete it. In other cases, sometimes you have different versions of your character name in your manuscript. As you can see here, Aubrey, and Aubrey Vale and Aubrey Vale Quinn are all the same person, and AB2, that's her nickname. So I can select all of these and then click on Merge Selected Characters and then check that, what's her actual name? Aubrey Vale Quinn. Okay, great. Merge. And then Fictionary will merge your characters. Here again, Debbie Downer. That's not a name. So I just delete, and that's about it. So you can go through here and make sure that you have... Oh, it picked me up too. Interesting. I'm not a character in my own book. So let me just delete that. But anyway, so you can go through and make sure that everything you have here is an actual character, delete and merge as you like. But the main thing that you want to do here, to make sure that you do, is select your protagonist and select your POV character. So you can see here on the side a button set as protagonist and a button set as single POV character. So in this particular book, I have one protagonist and she has the POV in all my scenes because my book is third-person limited point of view. So all the scenes are from Aubrey Vale Quinn's perspective. So she's the single POV character of this book, and she's also the protagonist. There are other times where, you might have multiple protagonists, or you might have, like, if you're writing a romance, you might have dual protagonists, or you might have a book where you're writing in third person omniscient, in which case your book has multiple POV characters and one protagonist. So there's many different cases where you wouldn't set the POV character, or you'd set multiple protagonists, or you'd set multiple POV characters. But in my case, for this book, Aubrey Vale Quinn is both. So I'm going to select her as, she's the POV for all scenes. And then I'm just going to select her again and set her as protagonist. And then you can see here she appears as my protagonist. Perfect. So you can play around with this and make sure you have all your characters figured out here. I'm just gonna move forward because this doesn't all have to be done right now. So I'm done for now. And now we enter this page, which is a little handy kind of tutorial page. This page will guide you through if it's your first time, or if you like to follow this path, you can feel free to do so. It's a little helpful tutorial page essentially. This is about the order that I do things in as well, but there are some times where I do veer off course, and I will show you when those times are. But to start with, I do exactly as they say first, which is to add my story blurb. And for those of you who aren't familiar with what a story blurb is, it's essentially little book description or manuscript description of your entire story. A skeleton blurb is the shortest version of a story blurb. So the skeleton blurb is essentially who is the protagonist, what is their story goal, and what is at stake. So let me show you what I mean. So I click add your story blurb. So my protagonist, as it knows because I selected it, and I just lost it, is Aubrey. There we go. So what is her story goal? I actually have it written down. So her story goal is to find and convince a brilliant hacker to fix the AI Echo's code. That's her story goal. And what is the story stakes? So what happens if she fails to do this? So in my story, what happens if she fails is she won't be able to find her father. So that is the skeleton blurb. And when you click on accept, then you see here it creates a nice little sentence for you that narrows down your entire story. Aubrey Quinn must find and convince a brilliant hacker to fix the AI Echo's code, otherwise she won't be able to find her father. The story blurb is essentially the book description that you've written for your book. And I have that as well. You may not have this yet, and that's okay. But it is good to have because it's a good exercise in being able to narrow your entire book down into about 250 words. It's always good to do. I like to have writers do this in the first step when working with me on their book foundations, because to be able to get down to the meat of your story, what it's really truly about, is very useful for knowing the message you want to convey with your book and what you want readers to take away. Because every story is about something, and you want to know what that is. In this case, I already have this written down, so I'm just going to copy and paste it in here. Alright, so we have our skeleton blurb and our story blurb. And you can see that it's just under 250 words. 250 is the sweet spot for your story blurb, I would say. It's also known as jacket copy, right? The text that goes on the back of your book. Okay, now that we have our skeleton and story blurb, I'm going to hit next because we did that, and that's all done there. Next, I like to check the chapters and scenes. So I navigate over to the evaluate page, and this is where all the editing happens. So this is where I make the changes. So I'm just going to remove this here because this is not necessary. Oops. I always forget that that's automatically on the track changes. Let me just remove that. I want this to be the chapter prologue. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to, again, don't want track changes on. Copy or cut and paste. Again, don't want track changes on. Okay, so now I have the chapter prologue in the beginning. And then this is just an empty chapter, so I will delete this. It's just saying the part. Okay, what I'm going to do now is I'm going to make sure that each scene actually is belonging to a chapter. Because right now it's taking some of the sections where I have, parts written, and it's putting them all in one chapter. So I'm gonna, for the sake of editing, remove parts and then re-add the parts after I am publishing the book. So I don't need them to be in parts right now. So I'm just gonna go ahead and delete all the chapters that have parts, that just have a part in them. And now see, it's more accurate. Okay, now I've deleted all the parts. Everything seems to be accurate. There's actually 37 chapters in the entire book plus a prologue. That seems more accurate to my book. So now that I've done that, I'm going to name my scenes. So I'm going to go back to Journey, and Journey is this page that we originally came to. and I've done the story blurb, so let's hit next. So now I want to name my scenes. So I'm going to click that. So a cool feature in Fictionary is it uses AI to name your scenes for you. Even if I already have chapter names done, I like to use this feature and have Fictionary name my scenes using AI, because the AI can tell you, based on what it names your scene, how clear your scene is, and whether it has a clear story goal or not. If the AI cannot name your scenes within 5 words, then that's a sign that your scene might not be as clear as you'd like it to be, and you might need to revise that scene. So I'm just going to click continue and have Fictionary name my scenes here. It does take a little bit, but there you see it happening. Pretty cool. And there we have it. Alright, so now I'm just going to X out of, well, I'm going to click review my scene names, and here I could see all the names. So I like to start off by doing that. Let's go back to Journey to check here where we are. Now I'd like to view my story arc to see if there's anything there. And this is the moment of truth, because the story arc is my personal favorite feature of StoryCoach that I haven't seen in any other editing program, where it basically maps out your story on a chart. Like, it maps out your story's arc. And I'll show you what I mean. You can also get there by hitting on the Visualize tab up here, but let me show you. Ta-da! So this is the story arc, and actually this is not bad at all. The basic idea of the story arc is that every story follows a specific arc that's universal for stories, and there are specific plot points at specific points in the arc of your story that take place at specific parts of your story. So the black line you see here is the universal story arc, and the yellow or orange line here is my story, or the story that you input in, that you're editing. And you want your story arc to be as close to the recommended story arc as possible. And that means that having the inciting incident around this point of the story, the plot point around this point, the middle here, the plot point too, and then climax, and then the resolution. So it seems the resolution is spot on, which is great. The climax is maybe one scene too late, which isn't too bad. The climax should happen around the 80% mark of your story, 80 to 85%, something like that. Plot point 2 seems spot on, okay. Middle is a bit early, plot point 1 is also a bit early, but then the inciting incident is a bit later. So this isn't too bad. I might want to look at the beginning here to see if something can be changed around to have this line up more, and maybe with the middle too, but overall this isn't too bad. This looks pretty good. Okay, now I'm gonna go back to the journey and go back to where we were. So just as a recap, we named our scenes, we viewed the story arc. So the way the order works here is that you're moving from story level to chapter level to scene level, back out again, zooming back out to story level. So you're zooming in and out, and this is very strategically done. Like, it's a very strategic, step-by-step, concrete, actionable way to view your story. And that's why I really like Fictionary StoryCoach, is because it guides you through this process. So if you don't know where to start with looking over your story, Fictionary is a great guide for that. Anyway, let's move on to chapter structure. Since I have one scene per chapter, my chapter structure and my scene structure is going to be pretty much the same. I've made it easier on myself, which is a good thing to do if you're a new writer and you're just starting out. Make it easier on yourself. Don't try to attempt to write a multi-POV, multi-protagonist, 100,000 plus word novel if you're just starting out, like Game of Thrones style. It's best to start with simple. And that's what I'm showing you with this as well. The simpler you go with your story structure and protagonist and the way you tell the story, the more invisible your storytelling will be and the more immersed your readers will be in the story because they're not being taken out of the story by confusing POV or anything like that. I like to experiment when I write short stories, like maybe writing in second person tense or omnipotent POV, but in my longer novels, I like to keep it simple. That's not to say that you have to do it like that. By all means, do whatever you are inspired to do and tell your story however it makes more sense for you to do. But if you're just starting out, it's good to start with something simple so you can learn the process, the whole thing about learning the rules before you break them. Alright, so first let's view word count per scene. So word count per scene is exactly how it sounds. You're just viewing how many words are in each scene of your novel. And again, my chapters are my scenes are my chapters, so chapters are synonymous with scenes for this particular book. That might not be the case for you. You might have multiple scenes in a chapter, but again, I'm keeping it simple and doing one scene per chapter. Just as a side note, when we were visualizing this story arc, plot points are associated with scenes, not chapters. This is looking at scene number 4, not chapter number 4. But because my chapters are synonymous with my scenes, this also is chapter number 4. Where it says scene 5, it's actually associated with chapter 5, but since I have a prologue, my prologue is scene 1. So where it says scene 5, that's actually my chapter 4. Here it says scene 9, that's my chapter 8. If you have multiple scenes per chapter, best practice is to have your story arc scene, so the scene in which these plot points take place, it's best practice to have those either be the first scene of your chapter or the last scene of your chapter. So not in the middle of your chapter, but if you have 3 scenes per chapter, for example, the inciting incident or plot point 1 or middle or any of those, you want the scene where those take place to be either the first scene or the last scene of that chapter. But okay, going back to where we were. So in general, when we have more words per scene, that means that scene is longer and it's most likely slower paced. If we have fewer words per scene, then that scene is generally going to be quicker paced. You can navigate along this panel here to see, oh wow, so look at this. My scene 23 is pretty long. So there has to be something significant about this scene to be this long. And sure enough, it is. Yeah, this chapter, this scene is a pretty significant scene, so I know why it's, that long. So it's okay to have some scenes be super long and some scenes be short, but there has to be a reason for it. And it's usually for pacing, the pacing of your novel. But because there's such a disparity between these two scenes and they're right next to each other, I might want to look at this and see, is there really a good reason why there's such a big difference here? And same with here and here. But this is probably the biggest in the entire novel. So you can see there's a big dip here. So this is a good way to visualize so I can know to check those two scenes. Now going back to the journey page, view scenes per chapter. Now again, this is all going to be 1 for me because this is not relevant to me because I just have 1 scene per chapter. If you have multiple scenes per chapter, then you'll be able to see that here. And same with the last one. If you have 1 chapter that has like 10 scenes and then the chapter next to it has like 1 scene, then you might want to look at why that is and maybe consider changing that, unless there's a good reason for it for your story. Okay, next we're going to look at point of view. Again, I've kept it simple. My book only has 1 point of view character, who is the protagonist, but your book might have multi-POV, so it might have 5 different POV characters that share chapter POVs throughout the story. Your book might be a romance and have dual protagonists, in which case both your love interests, characters, share the POV of your story. So in that case, this is going to be relevant. It's, again, not relevant for me because I just have single POV. So if you had multiple POV characters, they would all be appearing here. I'll show you later how to set the POV. You do that on the evaluate page. You set the POV character for each chapter separately if you have multi-POV for your book. I'll show you how to do that. It's done in the evaluate page. I'll show you that later. But as for now, just know that that will appear here. If you have one protagonist but multiple POV characters, your protagonist should have the highest number of scenes that they are the POV character for, because they are the protagonist. So if you have another character that has more POV scenes than the protagonist, that's kind of something that you might want to look at. Like, why does that character have more scenes where they're the POV character than the protagonist? And here you'll be able to see scene 1, who's the POV, scene 2, who's the POV, etc. And then here it will tell you what percentage. And again, you want your protagonist to have the highest number of scenes that they are the POV character for. I'm going to go into the scene level and then come back to the story level. And the scene level will include actually going through and editing and showing how exactly that works. If you yourself are a writer looking for guidance or for an editor, feel free to reach out. I will link everything down in the description below. Feel free to send me an email or fill out my contact form, and I will be in touch with you about your work in progress.
I, Aubrey Vale Quinn, daughter of a genius developer, Dr. Torrance Quinn, must find a hacker to fix Echo the AI before a mysterious and powerful unknown adversary uses them to destroy the world.
In a race against time, Aubrey Vale Quinn, daughter of a genius developer, must find and convince a hacker to fix Echo the AI before a mysterious and powerful unknown adversary gets to them first.
So I'm going to demonstrate how exactly I edit on the scene level. When I was talking about what I do when I draft and dabble, I actually create this exact thing using those dabble cards. Feel free to check out that video to show what I mean. So I essentially recreate this using those dabble cards. I have the scene name, who's the POV character, what is their goal, what happens if it fails, so what are the stakes, and then tension and conflict, which we will come back to. But I essentially map that out in Dabble, but I also do that in StoryCoach. You can create this for yourself. It's just that Fictionary StoryCoach automatically does it for you if you fill everything in, so you don't need to worry about missing anything. But if you have your own way of doing it, then feel free to do that as well. This is just a possibility of something you can add into your process if it works for you. Once I fill in everything on the evaluate page, which I will show in this video, these will all be filled up and you can evaluate for each scene if your tension and conflict is strong in this scene. Is there enough stakes in your story? Okay, so now we come to the evaluate page, which is where the magic happens. So this is where you fill out everything. And once you fill out everything here, then you'll be able to visualize everything better. There's a few things that you can actually have AI do, and there's other things that you have to fill in yourself. Fictionary is constantly being updated, and there are more and more features being added and more features under this Just Ask Fictionary tab. As you saw in the previous video, we used AI to help name our scenes. So the AI analyzed each of our scenes and named them according to what the scene was about. And I also mentioned that if the AI can come up with a scene name that's under 5 words, then that's usually a good sign. But if it can't, if it's over 5 words, then your scene might not be as clear as you'd like it to be. And as you can see here, my scene 1, there's 5 words. It's pretty good, it's pretty clear. and I do think my prologue is pretty good in that. But then you see chapter 1, it's a little more unclear. There's 6 words here. It's a little unclear what that's about. So that's a sign that I might want to look at that scene a little more closely. But let me show you what you can do with just Ask Fictionary. So I'm going to use the prologue as an example, and I'm going to demonstrate how I do all this. So what I like to start with is the scene overview. I've already named this scene, so I've done that. And under scene overview, we're under this tab, just Ask Fictionary Scene Overview. We have the word count, okay? We have the point of view character, which is Aubrey Quinn, and we know that Aubrey is the protagonist, so that's all great. Then we click AI scan, and now we get the scene overview as seen by AI. We have the scene name, we have the word count, and we have Aubrey as the POV character, and that's all good. Now I'm going to move to tension and conflict. I'm going to click save just in case. I'm going to move to tension and conflict. So now that we know the POV character is Aubrey Quinn, then we can have AI evaluate the tension and conflict. And as you saw on that page that I showed you before, the tension and conflict page, the tension and conflict of a scene is based on who's the POV character for the scene, what is their scene goal, what are the stakes, what happens if they don't get it, what happens if they fail, what happens if they don't reach that goal. That's essentially what tension is. Well, that's tension. Conflict is what is standing in the way, what is in direct conflict with that POV character and their goal. With that knowledge, let's evaluate the tension and conflict for this scene. Okay, so AI said, based on what it read, Aubrey Quinn, okay, we have her as the POV, her goal is to find her father. What if goal fails? Aubrey's father disappears, leaving behind a cryptic message and a trail of destruction. Alright, that's a bit dramatic, but that's what we want. That's what we want in a book. Okay. Tension. Aubrey's worried because her father, who rarely expresses emotions, called her to say he loved her and then disappeared, leaving behind a chaotic office and a mysterious message. Conflict. The external conflict in the scene is directly related to Aubrey's goal of finding her father. The scene establishes that something is wrong, and Aubrey's immediate concern is finding her father and understanding what happened. Okay, so that's pretty good. And as you can see here, the story goal, the POV character's goal in the scene, is directly related to the protagonist's goal for the whole book, right? Because her goal is to find the hacker, fix the code to find her father. So this scene is a direct relation to that story goal, to find her father. And so we see the story stakes here. So what happens if the goal fails? This could be made clearer probably. So based on this, let's look at the scene structure and evaluate that. Entry hook. So the entry hook is what's at the beginning of the scene that hooks the reader in. We want the entry hook to appear early on in the scene. So if it doesn't appear early on, we might want to take a look at why that is. And then POV goal, to find her father? Yep. Scene middle. Aubrey's father's unexpected call reveals a hidden truth, forcing her to confront their strained relationship and a potential danger. Scene middle should happen at about the midpoint of the scene. Looking at this scene, I'll probably, that's fine, the scene middle, but I'll probably want to bring the entry hook further up to create a stronger scene. So that's how I know how I'm going to edit this. Scene climax. Aubrey discovers her father's office in disarray, revealing a hidden project and a cryptic message. That's good. I have that at the end of towards the end of the scene. We want the scene climax to appear close to the end. And then exit hook. What does QENS mean? Perfect. So exit hook is supposed to happen at the very end of the scene. It's to hook the reader in to keep reading on to the next scene. So what grabs their attention so they want to keep reading. So this is how to evaluate your scenes using AI. And this in itself is very powerful. I'm sure you can see that based on what we've been doing with it so far. But another cool thing that Fictionary does when you evaluate is it automatically fills this in for you. So it's already there when you are looking to fill these in for each scene. Now I just want to show you quickly when we go back to right over here. Now you can see this is all filled out for the first scene. We have scene 1, daughter finds father's missing office, and point of view character Aubrey Quinn. What is her goal? To find her father. What if goal fails? Aubrey's father disappears, leaving behind a cryptic message and a trail of destruction. Tension. Aubrey's worried because her father, who rarely expresses emotions, called her to say he loved her and then disappeared, leaving behind a chaotic office and a mysterious message. Conflict. Directly related. We want the conflict to be directly related to Aubrey's goal because we want the conflict to get in the way of the goal. So this is good that it's directly related. The premise that we saw in the story blurb, which was that Aubrey must find and convince a brilliant hacker to fix the AI Echo's code, otherwise she won't be able to find her father. And this is what sets that into motion.
Greetings, I'm Dr. Torrance Quinn. I'm the one everyone is looking for, but do I really want to be found? I guess you'll have to pick up the book to find out. Who knows, maybe you'll find me yourself.
So what I like to do after I've gone through all the AI pieces here, after saving, is I like to then go back in this way and fill these out. So I go from right to left because the setting is the hardest for me to do, so I do it first, because when I've read the scene multiple times, everything here just blends into the scene and I forget to look for these. So for my particular order, I like to do these first. So notes is just a section where you can just type notes. If I was editing this for a client, this would be where I would put scene notes. I would also give a summary letter separately to the client, but if I had notes that I wanted to tell the client about this particular scene, I would enter them here. And then I would also use the track changes and comments. So this is the cool thing about Fictionary, is you can do all of this here. I can write a comment. And then I can add and remove things. And it will show up when I export this to the client. The client does have to have a Fictionary account. They need to have a StoryCoach client account, and they can have the first, I believe it's 7 days free, but after that they will have to pay for it. So that's another thing to think about for Fictionary. When I edit, I give my clients that 7-day free access to make the changes, make the revisions, or if they want to export out the document and export out the scene notes and all of that, or whatever they want to do, they have the initial 7 days free, but after that they need to get either a month subscription or a yearly subscription to Fictionary in order to use the features. That's how this works. I do sometimes use it just to make notes for myself. For example, here I was saying how I wanted to make sure this entry hook happens in the beginning, but I'm seeing what happened to Dr. Quinn is actually probably more here towards the middle where she's calling and getting dead air. So maybe I might make a note here and say entry hook. So I remember to come back here and see if I can revise this scene to make this appear earlier in the scene. So that's usually what I use the track changes for myself. And then here, I can write entry hook, revise, since it's in the middle of the scene instead of in the beginning. So that's an example of what I would use this for myself. Alright, so now going to setting, I'll show you how I fill this out. So location. where does this take place? This takes place, I could see here, her dorm. So Aubrey's dorm. Aubrey's dorm. So that's fine. Date and time, we already see that here. So it's, and then we also see April. So April at 11:42 p.m. Object. So object is there any specific object here that has some kind of importance that we'd want to keep track of? I would say coffee. Coffee comes up a lot in this book, so I might want to keep track of my use of the word coffee and you know how she uses that. She calls it different things here, like GPA saving liquid and things like that. So it might have some kind of significance, it may not, but it's good to keep track. Alright, so sights. So sights is, you know, what does she see? Is there anything she sees? I think later on in this, at her father's condo, and she's looking at the mess that has been left behind, there's a lot of sights here, so I'd probably put those in. I'm not going to put all of them in right now, because I don't want to have this go on too long, but that's where you would put sights. And same with smells. Does she smell something? Maybe she smells coffee or coffee aroma or whatever it is, you know. This is just to make sure that you're using the 5 senses in your scenes. Not every scene has to include all of these, but it's good practice to have at least some in every one of your scenes. So same here, sounds, paper shredding. Emotional impact, this is just looking at whether the location this takes place in has enough emotional impact. Does the scene take place in a location that has the most possible emotional impact for that scene? In this case, I would say yes, because it takes place in what is now where Aubrey considers home, and she gets a call from her father, and that sets her off to go then to his place, which after he goes missing, that's a very strong emotion-centered place because that's where he was when he went missing, and that's the place where she saw him the most. So I would say yes. Location split, this just means does the scene take place across just one location or multiple locations? In this case, yes, because it starts in her dorm room, then she's on the street heading to her father's condo, and then by the end, she's looking through her father's condo. So it takes place across 3 locations, so yes. Weather, we can see here it's raining heavily. Raining heavily. And the weather is a great way to show emotion, to show conflict and tension. It's a great way to increase tension. The whole show versus tell, weather is a good way to do that. This is a good reminder to check the weather and see if it's adding something to your story. Taste, again, that's pretty self-explanatory, and same with touch. Does she run her fingers along the spine of books on her father's bookshelf? Yes, she does. Okay, so that's setting. What I like to do is I go setting and then character and then come back to plot. Setting. Now what I like to do is go from setting to character and then to plot. And this just, again, my personal preference. You can go whatever order you'd like. There's also another thing here that's pretty cool that brings up the word cloud. So what's the most common words that are used in this particular scene? Aubrey is the main word, and then father is Julie. It makes sense. When it comes to word use, repetition, things like that, line edits, that I use AutoCrit for, and ProWritingAid, which I will be going into in a later video. Right now we're just focusing on story editing. Word level, sentence level, we're not looking at that just yet, so just as a side note. Okay, so now we're looking at characters. So first we can look at the character list, and here we see every character who's in this scene and versus the characters who are mentioned. Jules and Julie are the same person, which is why when you go to the journey cast of characters, you can look at why that is and merge those 2 characters. So we have Julie, Jules, merge. Julie, Alright, now let's go back to evaluate. Okay, so let's view the character list again. Aubrey's in this scene, Julie's in this scene, Mom is not in this scene, Pitt is mentioned, that's not a character, so I have to remove that from the cast of characters. Sam in the scene. Again, Quinn needs to be merged with either Aubrey or Torrance. But other than that, these are the characters in the scene. That looks about right. Make sure it's all good. Okay, and then we have goal, which is already entered in from what we did with the AI. So that's automatically entered in. So Aubrey is the point of view character. That's automatically the case for all the scenes because that's what I had set in the beginning. Her goal in this scene is to find her father. So story goal tracking is, does she achieve her goal? If she achieves it, it has a positive impact, then we select positive. If she doesn't, if it has a negative impact on her, then it's negative. And if it's neutral, then it's neutral. Positive and negative are both good, but we want to avoid having a neutral because we want our characters to go up and down. We want them to have wins and losses, but we don't want them to have not changed. We don't want the scene to have a neutral impact on them because then what's the point of the scene? So in this case, she has a negative because she fails to find her father. Alright, so POV goal internal, and in this case, her goal is, so that's her internal goal. Oops. Acceptance. Alright, so is goal related to plot? So is the external goal, the POV goal, related to the plot? Yes, it is in this case because, as we saw in the skeleton blurb, she needs to find her father, and so that's also the goal of this scene, so it's directly related. So what if goal fails? That's already inputted in for us, and she does fail, so it's a negative impact. And protagonist is the same as the POV, so we put negative. Every scene has to impact the protagonist, whether they are in the scene or not. In this case, Aubrey is always the POV character, so she's in every single scene. So POV knowledge gained. This basically is what knowledge does the POV character gain in this particular scene. So I would say in this scene, she gains the knowledge that her father, because he disappears, he is taken by someone. Character emotion just means, are the characters, is there movement in the scene? Are the characters in motion? So we see her moving around, going on the scooter, going over to the apartment, so definitely the characters are in motion.
Psst. Over here. Yes, you. I'm Dr. Torrance Quinn, the one everyone is looking for. I decided to move from sci-fi to fantasy until I can figure out what Quantum Synergies is up to. Take care of Echo.
Now we move to the plot tab, and this is what I like to do last once I have all these other things filled out, and some of them are already pre-filled out, like we have the scene name that's already generated by the AI. So story arc, this pertains to what we saw on that page where it visualized the whole story's arc for us. And this is basically asking, is this one of those pivotal story arc scenes, one of those 5 scenes? So the 5 scenes are inciting incident, plot point 1, middle, plot point 2, climax, or resolution. And if it is not, then we leave this as no, and it isn't because the inciting incident comes later when she discovers the AI, so that's not this one yet. So when we click yes, then this drop down will show you all those story arc scenes. So which one would it be? And if we click no, then this drop down changes to non-story arc scenes. So in this case, since it's the prologue, this introduces the character. So I would say character introduction. Opening type is looking at whether the scene opens with dialogue, thought, description, or action. In this case, it's action, because Aubrey is staring at her textbook. So that's action. So closing type, so we look at the very last sentence. It's a text. So it would be, I would put that under dialogue, because she's essentially saying this through text to her friend. Anchored, this means, is the scene anchored in POV, scene time, and scene setting? So do we know pretty much right away when you start reading, within the first few paragraphs, whose point of view is this from? Yes, we know right away. It says right here, so it's anchored. Do we know when this takes place? Yep. 11:42, nighttime, April. Yep. Scene setting, dorm room, university. So this prologue is well anchored. Other scenes may not be, but this one is. So now these were all filled out by the AI as well. Entry hook, as I showed under notes, that's what I might have to revise this scene to account for. If I move this to the beginning, then it might make my scene stronger. So I want to look at that. This is already pretty good. The exit hook is, what do these letters mean? So the reader by the end of this scene asks this question and they want to know, what does this mean? I want to know more. I want to keep reading, so that they move to the next scene. And as we already looked at the tension conflict before, revelation is similar to, in the character here, the POV knowledge gained, but what revelation does the character have? And you can put something else here, like for example, or whatever it is that you want to keep track of down the line. Backstory. Backstory is just something in the past, before the story starts, that the reader learns from this scene. And flashback, sometimes there's going to be flashback, sometimes not, but I don't think in this case there are any, and that's okay. Not every scene needs to have everything. So flashback would be when the character actually experiences that moment as if it was the present. So if a character just mentions something happened in the past, that's not a flashback. It has to be something that's brought to the present as if it's happening now. So scene, middle, and climax we already looked at. Action sequel refers to whether the scene is an action scene, like it's taking the story forward in some active way, or if it's a sequel, which means, is it a response scene? Is it a response to a previous scene? I want to make sure all the story arc scenes, these ones, are action scenes because they drive the story forward. But the other scenes can be sequel scenes because they're a reaction. So this one is very much an action scene because we see something that really drives the story forward, which is that she gets that phone call, she has to act, and the next scene I would say is more of a sequel scene. This one's action. So reader knowledge gained. This one is, again, somewhat similar to backstory, except it doesn't necessarily need to happen in the past. It's just what knowledge does the reader gain from this scene? It's another thing that you can use to keep track of in the story. So for example, whatever it is you want to keep track of. So that's how you fill all these out. And once you've done that for the scene, then there's multiple ways you can visualize these scenes. And you can do that by going to the visualize page where we first saw this. And then you can go down here to visualize a story in different ways. Here in the story outline section, you can also see a similar map of your story arc, but just in a different format. So you can see here that I have a total of 38 scenes and 38 chapters. As I said before in the previous video, how I have one scene per chapter, so that's why I have the same amount of both. And you can see here, these are the scene names. This is how close together the story arc plot points are. So here we have the inciting incident, plot point 1, then the middle, plot point 2, climax, and resolution. So this is just a different way to view the story arc. And you can view your word count per scene. I touched on this previously. Scenes per chapter, I also touched on this previously. Story map is where we went to evaluate the tension and conflict. And that's what you can do. You have some pre-selected, pre-filled out things over here, so you can click on each of these to view those. So timelines and settings, you can view, or you can view tension and conflict, which I showed before. And there's just different story goal and pacing, which is looking at how that plays out, so on and so forth. Here, your progress, you could see how much you filled out on all your scenes on the evaluate page, the character, plot, and setting elements. Another very useful tool that I like to use is when I go into evaluate and I want to see the tracking for the story goal. I can click on this, and right now it's like just at 0 because I've only marked it for the first scene in the prologue. But once you've filled out all your scenes, this should look something like a graph that goes up, down, up, down, up, down, up, down, down, up, down. And you want to make sure that it never goes like this, like it never flatlines, because then your story flatlines, basically. Like I said before, you always want your protagonist to either be impacted negatively by a scene or impacted positively. Or in other words, you want each scene to either have a positive impact on the story goal or a negative impact on the story goal. You never want it to have no or a neutral impact, because that's boring. No one wants to read a story that flatlines. So another way to access all this is when you go to visualize. I went through all the manuscript insights. Then you can go to the character insights, and you can see how many characters there are per scene. So this is another useful metric you can look at. Here there's 2 characters, here there's 8, and here there's 10. So you might want to look at why there's 10 characters here and then just 2 over here. That's another thing to keep in mind. That up here you can see, so there's always at least 2 characters in any of your scenes. So the smallest amount of characters in the scene is always 2, and the maximum is 10. You can look at scenes per character. So Aubrey Quinn in this case has the most scenes, which makes complete sense because she is the protagonist and she is the single POV character. So she's going to have most of the scenes. In fact, she's going to be in all the scenes. If you have a multi-POV story, then you're going to see some of the characters have many scenes as well. You're going to see other characters be in many of the scenes as well. But you always want to make sure your protagonist or your protagonists, if you have multiple protagonists, you always want to make sure that they have the most scenes, or that they have at least more scenes than those who are not protagonists or those who are not POV characters. Again, this is not completely accurate because I need to go into the cast of characters and remove this character, Quinn, because Quinn is either Aubrey Quinn or her father, Torrance Quinn. So actually, let me just do that right now and show you how that changes if I do that. So, let's see where this is not a character. This is why you need to do this before going through. Hacker Aubrey. That's a new one. Mickey Mouse. Alright, that's good enough. So now if I go back to character insights, see it's already changed. This is why it's important to do that first, because now I can see there's actually the lowest number of characters per scene is actually 1 and the highest is 8. So there's a demonstration of why it's important to get your cast of characters down first. And then here you can see there's no Quinn, because that's not a character. There's Aubrey Quinn, Torrance Quinn, and that looks about right. There's still a few here that are not characters, but next we have, going back to the POV, I already went through that one, and then the goal tracking. Now we can look at plot insights. So purpose of scenes. If you remember when you were on the evaluate page under the plot tab, there was scene purpose, so you can see what's the purpose of each scene and how many are taking the story forward in some way. So maybe if you have a bunch of character introductions, then you'd be like, why are there so many character introductions? These are all the story goal scenes that have been set already. But once you have all your scenes filled out on the evaluate page, this will populate. And same here with scene opening and closing types. So you want to kind of vary them. So if you open with action, you might open with dialogue, you might open with thought or description, and same, you might close with a specific type as well. You'll be able to evaluate here, like maybe you open too many scenes with description and you want to vary it up a bit. Maybe you want to open more scenes with action or thought or dialogue. And it also depends on what genre you're writing. Like maybe if you're writing a thriller, then you want to open with more action scenes than description. Maybe if you're world building, you're writing some kind of high fantasy novel, you might be able to get away with opening or closing with more description. So it also depends on your specific genre as well. And last but not least, we have setting insights, and this just shows for each scene all the, sights, smells, sounds, the 5 senses. This just helps you make sure that all your scenes have at least some of those 5 sensory to help ground the reader, to help the reader feel like they're present in the scene. So that's pretty much it for Fictionary. I've pretty much summed up all the main things you can do with it. Hopefully, the goal is that once you have everything filled out and you've edited every scene and rewritten everything, that these all align how they're supposed to, or as close as possible. I'm gonna have to look mostly at this plot point 1 here. The way to look at this is, you could press here and see which scene is it talking about. So you could press on each of these scenes. Of course, it starts with the prologue and the inciting incident. Your inciting incident is usually okay to appear 15% of the way through your novel or earlier. So if it's actually your first scene or your second scene, that's okay too. It can appear earlier, but it's not as great for it to appear later. So I might want to look at that and see why it's appearing later. And then another last thing here that you can do is you go to Journey and Synopsis. So what you can do here, because you've already entered in the story blurb and skeleton blurb. You can create the skeleton synopsis and the story synopsis. So the story synopsis, the difference between a blurb and a synopsis, the blurb is the book blurb or the book description. That's more like the sales copy. So how are you hooking the readers to come to read your book? The synopsis is literally just a step-by-step summary of exactly what happens in your book from start to finish. So the synopsis, you actually reveal what exactly happens, whereas in the story blurb, you're just hinting at what happens. It usually just focuses more on the beginning of the story. The synopsis has spoilers, basically, so you don't want to reveal that to your readers unless they've already read the story. But this is a good way to also look at your story, because the way you build your synopsis is you start with the 5 plot points and then you write them out here. You go to the evaluate page and you go to that plot point. So whatever you have for the inciting incident, you put down what is your character's POV goal, what's the scene middle, what's the scene climax, and what's the impact. And that's your skeleton synopsis. And then once you have that, then you can build your synopsis out of that, because you want them to focus on your main scenes. And these are your main scenes that drive your story forward. And a really cool thing that you can do here is you can also export your story synopsis. Alright, that's it for Fictionary. As I mentioned, I use the StoryCoach, so when I first import a manuscript, it appears under my clients. And because this is technically my book, I can click this and move it into my bookshelf, which is where all my stories are, and this is where I edit. But if I'm editing a client's book, then I work here, and I work in this platform. Alright, that's it for this video. Next video, I will go into how I perform line edits, and I use AutoCrit and ProWritingAid for this. And first I start with AutoCrit, and I'll show you exactly how I do that in the next video. If you're interested in that, then hit the subscribe button down below, hit the bell to be notified when that video comes out, and if you found this video useful, then hit the like button down below, leave a comment or two. If you have any questions about Fictionary or anything at all, then feel free to comment down below and I will get back to you. I read all comments and I respond to all emails. And if you'd like to contact me, then feel free to send me an email or fill out my contact form. I will leave all that down in the description below. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you found this useful, insightful, and educational. And until next time, happy writing, happy editing. See you in the next one. Bye for now.
Hello, I'm Rochelle. Welcome to Quantum Synergies. You're going to love it here. Don't worry, we will do everything we can to find Dr. Quinn. I'm here whenever you need me. Anytime. Really, anytime.